John Wayne Gacy made America laugh. Birthday parties, parades, hospital visits. A friendly clown with a painted smile and a handshake for every neighbor. But beneath that perfect suburban image, 33 teenage boys and young men were vanishing. And the man everyone trusted was burying them just feet from his own kitchen. People still ask, how did he hide in plain sight? But the real question is darker. What kind of childhood creates someone this twisted, this deceptive, this dangerous? Because long before Gacy became the killer clown, he was a terrified kid in a Chicago home where love didn't exist. Only fists, insults, and a father whose approval he could never win. A father who beat him for crying, mocked him when he was sick, called him weak, worthless, and broken. A father who didn't just punish him, he shaped him. The world saw the clown. His victims saw the predator. But before all of that, there was a frightened little boy trying to survive a man who taught him fear before he even knew his ABCs. Netflix told you the murders. What they didn't tell you is where the nightmare truly began. And trust me, it's worse than you think. If you're ready to see how a child becomes a monster, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story starts long before the bodies and long before the clown. Now let's go back to the house where John Wayne Gacy's real horror story began. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, the second of 3 children born to John Gacy Sr. and Marion Robinson. His mother was a stay-at-home parent, warm and protective. His father was a different story entirely. John Gacy Sr. was a World War I veteran who came home with trauma he never addressed and drowned in alcohol instead. He was cold, cruel, and physically violent toward his entire family. But his son bore the worst of it. Young John wasn't just beaten. He was systematically destroyed. His father called him stupid, called him a failure, called him queer despite the boy never discussing his sexuality. The message was clear from the earliest age. You are worthless, and you will never be enough. One of Gacy's earliest memories was watching his father work on an engine in the garage. Being a curious child, he touched some of the parts, and his father exploded. He grabbed a leather belt and beat the boy until his mother intervened, only for her to receive the same treatment. This became the pattern. Anyone who stood up to John Sr. faced his wrath, so young Gacy learned to absorb the abuse silently, becoming a voluntary punching bag to protect his mother and sisters. But the beatings weren't the only trauma. When Gacy was just 7 years old, his father introduced him to a friend, a grown man who proceeded to sexually abuse the boy for months. Gacy never told anyone. He knew his father wouldn't believe him, knew he'd somehow be blamed, so he suffered in silence. And here's where the story takes its first dark turn. Later that same year, 7-year-old Gacy and a friend cornered a girl at school and molested her. The cycle had already begun. His father's abuse only escalated. By age 11, a beating left Gacy unconscious and caused lasting damage. He began experiencing fainting spells and blackouts that would plague him for years. He developed a serious heart condition that kept him in and out of hospitals throughout his childhood. His father, predictably, accused him of faking it all for attention. Despite this nightmare at home, Gacy managed to function. When he turned 18, he pursued a career in politics, specifically with the Democratic Party, which infuriated his Republican father. By now, Gacy was a large man, physically bigger than his father, and the beatings finally stopped. But his father found new ways to torment him, buying him a car only to hold it hostage over missed payments, sabotaging his ability to get to work. At 20, Gacy snapped. He ran away to Las Vegas, got a job as an ambulance driver, then transferred to the morgue. He was homeless, secretly sleeping on a cot behind the embalming room. And one night, something inside him revealed itself. He remembered a teenage boy's body in one of the refrigerated drawers. He pulled it out, climbed onto the table, and held the corpse. For several minutes, he just lay there, embracing a dead boy, until panic set in and he fled. The next morning, Gacy called his mother, begging to come home. Back in Chicago, he enrolled in business school, earned his diploma, and got a job as a shoe salesman. He was good at it, charming, persuasive, constantly promoted. He joined the GACY'S, a community service organization, and rose through the ranks to vice president. Everyone loved him. He met Marilyn Myers, whose wealthy father owned 3 KFC franchises. They married, and suddenly Gacy was managing those restaurants, earning the equivalent of over $100,000 a year, with a wife, 2 children, and finally, his father's approval. But Gacy was living a lie. He'd begun luring teenage male employees to the restaurant basement he called the club, getting them drunk, making sexual advances. Some complied, others refused, and Gacy would laugh it off as a test of their morals. Then came 15-year-old Donald Voorhees, son of a fellow JC. Gacy took him home, got him drunk, showed him pornography, and convinced the boy that having sex with a man was a prerequisite for having sex with a woman. The abuse continued for months, until Donald finally told his father. Police arrested Gacy. He demanded a polygraph test, so confident in his manipulation, but the results were inconclusive. His JC friends rallied behind him, convinced Donald's father was simply jealous of Gacy's position. But Gacy wanted revenge. He paid a 16-year-old employee $2,500 to track down Donald Voorhees, pepper spray him, and beat him into retracting his statement. The boy refused. The attacker was caught and confessed. Now, Gacy faced charges for both the sexual assault and witness intimidation. Psychiatric evaluations diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder. Doctors noted that no treatment or medication could help him. He was deemed fit for trial, pled guilty, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. That same day, his wife Marilyn filed for divorce. She took both children, and he never saw any of them again. The KFC empire, the JC prestige, his father's hard-won respect, gone in an instant. But here's the twist that would cost 33 young men their lives. John Wayne Gacy wouldn't serve 10 years. He'd serve 18 months, and he'd walk out with his record wiped clean, free to kill. If you're still with me, type "still here" in the comments. I want to see the ones who stay through the uncomfortable truths. Please subscribe, like, and share this video. Cases like this remind us how important it is to protect children before the damage is done. Let's keep going. John Wayne Gacy walked out of prison after serving just 18 months of a 10-year sentence for raping a child. He was a model prisoner. The guards loved him. He became head cook within months. And he even joined the prison GACY'S chapter, recruiting 600 inmates and campaigning for better conditions. The parole board saw a reformed man. They saw exactly what Gacy wanted them to see. He returned to Chicago on probation. forced to live with his mother in the family home, now empty of his father, who had died while Gacy was incarcerated. Gacy never got to attend the funeral. He was back to square one. No wife, no children, no business, a 10 p.m. curfew, and his mother watching his every move. He got a job as a chef and waited for his probation to end. He didn't wait long to reoffend. 9 months into his probation, Gacy sexually assaulted another teenage boy, a runaway he'd picked up at a bus station. The boy escaped and reported it to police. The case went all the way to trial, but on the day of court, the victim never showed up. Case dropped. Many believe Gacy used the same intimidation tactics that worked so well with Donald Voorhees. We'll never know for certain, but the pattern was unmistakable. 4 days after his probation ended, Gacy struck again. This time, he impersonated a police officer, flashing a fake badge to lure a young boy into his car. He drove the boy home, assaulted him, and let him go. But this victim fought back differently. He tried to blackmail Gacy, threatening to go to police unless he was paid. Gacy refused. The boy reported the assault, and Gacy was brought in for questioning. His response was masterful manipulation. He told police the boy was trying to extort him, that the allegations were revenge for not paying up. Police believed Gacy. Case dropped. 2 sexual assaults, 2 cases dismissed. And then came the decision that would enable a massacre. The Iowa Parole Board, having heard nothing about either incident, declared John Wayne Gacy rehabilitated and expunged his criminal record entirely. A convicted child rapist now had a clean slate. He could apply for any job, live anywhere, and no one would ever know what he truly was. Gacy's mother, exhausted by the constant police presence and court appearances, offered her son money to leave. He gladly accepted and used it as a down payment on a ranch-style house in Cook County, Illinois, 8213 West Summerdale Avenue, the address that would become synonymous with horror. But first, it became the foundation of a new empire. Gacy threw himself into reinvention. He introduced himself to every neighbor, offering free favors, mowing lawns, shoveling snow, lending a hand whenever needed. He hosted massive parties on his property, events so legendary that local politicians attended. Everyone who met him walked away charmed. This was the new John Wayne Gacy. Successful businessman, generous neighbor, pillar of the community. He reconnected with Carol Hoff, a woman he dated briefly in high school. Both had been married, both had divorced, and now they rekindled their romance. They married, and Carol moved into the Summerdale house with her 2 daughters. Gacy also started his own contracting company, PDM Contractors, offering painting, decorating, maintenance, repairs, and landscaping. Business boomed through word of mouth. Everyone loved Gacy. Everyone recommended him. And soon he was earning nearly as much as he had managing those KFC restaurants. But his hiring practices revealed his true intentions. His employees were almost exclusively teenage boys. The pattern from Iowa repeated itself with sickening precision. Gacy would invite employees to his home after hours, ply them with alcohol, show them pornography, and proposition them for sex. Some agreed in exchange for money or promotions. Those who refused faced mounting pressure. Suddenly they'd owe Gacy large sums of money for fabricated reasons, debts they could only repay through sexual favors. And if they still resisted, Gacy reminded them he owned guns and knew how to use them. Some of these boys were as young as 14. In 1973, Gacy took a teenage employee on an 18-hour drive to Florida for a job. He booked one hotel room with one double bed. On their first night there, he raped the boy. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. The employee said nothing for days. He was terrified, stranded, and completely dependent on Gacy for the ride home. When they returned to Chicago, the employee beat Gacy bloody in front of Carol and her daughters. Gacy told his wife they'd simply argued over wages. She believed him, but Carol was growing suspicious. She noticed her husband leaving late at night, returning in the early hours with teenage boys who'd disappear into his garage. She investigated and found stacks of gay pornography and identification cards belonging to young men. She confronted him repeatedly, but Gacy had an answer for everything. In 1975, he came out to her as bisexual. That same night, after they had sex, he told her they would never be intimate again. He simply wasn't interested in women anymore. From then on, his business trips grew longer, his nights out more frequent. Carol knew he was cheating with young men. She watched, she waited, and eventually she packed up her daughters and left. The mask was intact, but beneath the Summerdale house, the crawl space was being dug. And John Wayne Gacy was finally free to become what he'd always been. If you're still here, do me one favor. Hit subscribe, like this video, and share it. The more people who watch, the more awareness we spread to keep kids safe. Now let's continue. January 3rd, 1972. John Wayne Gacy had just married his second wife, Carol, and everything seemed perfect. But that night, driving home alone through Chicago in the early hours of the morning, he passed the Greyhound bus station and spotted a teenage boy sitting alone in the freezing cold. 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy had been visiting family in Michigan for Christmas and was waiting for his morning bus back to Nevada. The station was closed overnight, leaving him stranded outside in dangerous sub-zero temperatures. Gacy pulled over, struck up a conversation, and offered to show Timothy the sights of Chicago until his bus arrived. The boy accepted. What choice did he have? They drove around for hours, talking, sightseeing, and when they'd exhausted every tourist spot, Gacy made another offer. Timothy could sleep in his spare bedroom and catch his bus in the morning. The boy agreed. He had no reason not to trust this friendly stranger. According to Gacy's later confession, he woke the next morning to find Timothy standing in his bedroom doorway, holding a large kitchen knife, looking furious. Gacy claimed he lunged at the boy in self-defense, slashing his own arm in the struggle, a scar he showed police years later. He said he wrestled Timothy to the ground and, in a fit of rage, stabbed him repeatedly until the boy stopped moving. But then Gacy said something that revealed the truth beneath his self-defense story. He described lying down next to Timothy's dying body and listening to what he called the gurgles, the sound of the boy choking on his own blood. He said he found it exhilarating. He climbed on top of the dying teenager and experienced what he described as a mind-numbing orgasm. That's when I realized, Gacy told police, that death was the ultimate thrill. When he walked into the kitchen afterward to wash the knife, his heart dropped. Laid out on the counter were eggs, ham, plates for two, and utensils. Timothy hadn't been attacking him. The boy had been making breakfast as a thank you for letting him stay the night. Gacy had misread the situation entirely and murdered him for it. He spent the rest of that day burying Timothy's body on his property and pouring concrete over the grave. That concrete became the foundation of his garage, a garage where he would later torture and murder dozens more. Then something unexpected happened. Nothing. 2 full years passed before Gacy killed again. Perhaps the reality of what he'd done frightened him. Perhaps he was simply being cautious. But in January 1974, the urge returned. His second victim remains unidentified to this day. Gacy strangled the boy with a rope and stored the corpse in his bedroom wardrobe, right next to the bed he shared with his wife Carol. The body stayed there for days, while Gacy figured out what to do with it. When decomposition began and fluids started leaking onto the carpet, he learned a lesson he'd apply to future victims: stuff their mouths and orifices with rags to prevent leakage. He had one of his employees, David Cram, dig out a crawl space beneath the house, supposedly for drainage purposes. The trenches measured 6 feet long, 2 feet deep, and 2 feet wide. The exact dimensions of a human grave. The second victim was buried there, and Gacy instructed Cram to spread 10 bags of lime over the soil. Lime is highly alkaline. When mixed with water, it creates calcium hydroxide, a corrosive substance used to accelerate decomposition. Gacy, the contractor, had easy access to it. No one questioned the purchase. Another 18 months passed before his third kill. On July 30th, 1975, 18-year-old John Butkovich, one of Gacy's own employees, confronted him about wages he was owed. Gacy invited him over for drinks to discuss it. Hours later, he demonstrated a magic trick with handcuffs. Gacy put them on himself, wriggled free, and offered to teach John the secret. The moment the cuffs clicked around John's wrists, Gacy revealed there was no trick, just a key in his pocket. He sat on the boy's chest and strangled him to death. John Butkovich's parents reported him missing and specifically named Gacy as a suspect. Police interviewed him, but believed his story that John had simply run away. The Butkoviches begged investigators to look deeper. No one listened. After his divorce from Carol in 1976, Gacy's killing accelerated catastrophically. He called it cruising, driving through Chicago at night, looking for young men to pick up. On May 14, 1976, he murdered 2 victims in a single day, 15-year-old Randall Reffett and 14-year-old Sam Stapleton, abducted separately and buried side by side in the crawl space. That same year, Gacy joined the Jolly Jokers Club, a group of men who entertained children at hospitals and birthday parties dressed as clowns. He created 2 characters, Pogo, a cheerful, silly clown, and Patches, a somber, almost melancholic figure. He performed for free, visiting sick children, making everyone laugh. The community loved him even more. But some of his victims fought back. 15-year-old Anthony Antonucci managed to slip out of Gacy's handcuffs when one didn't close properly. He tackled Gacy, wrestled him to the ground, and somehow got the handcuffs onto his attacker. He held Gacy there until the man calmed down and promised to leave. Antonucci survived and had to keep working for Gacy afterward because he needed the money. David Cram, the employee who dug the crawl space, moved into Gacy's spare bedroom after being offered free lodging. On the night he moved in, Gacy got him drunk, handcuffed him, and announced he was going to rape him. Cram managed to kick Gacy in the face and escape to his room. A month later, Gacy appeared in his doorway at night and tried again. Cram fled the next morning. 19-year-old Robert Donnelly was abducted at gunpoint and tortured for hours, repeatedly submerged in freezing water until he passed out, revived, then submerged again. When Donnelly begged Gacy to just kill him and end the suffering, something shifted. Gacy let him go. Donnelly reported everything to police. Gacy told them Donnelly was a bitter ex-lover making up stories. Police believed Gacy. 26-year-old Jeffrey Rignall was chloroformed, tortured for hours, and dumped unconscious in a park. He went to police with his girlfriend. They did virtually nothing. A man had been kidnapped, tortured, and raped, and the system simply shrugged. By 1978, the crawl space was full. 29 bodies lay stacked on top of each other beneath the house, bones intertwined, decomposing in lime. Gacy needed a new disposal method. He found one in the Des Plaines River, dumping his final victims there and hoping the current would carry them away. His neighbors later admitted they'd heard muffled screams coming from the house in the middle of the night, screams loud enough to wake them and their children. Not one of them called police. This was John Wayne Gacy, after all, the helpful neighbor, the successful businessman. The clown who made children laugh. How could someone like that be a monster? If you're still watching, comment, "Still here." I read everyone. And please, subscribe, like, and share this story. Awareness is how we protect the next child from becoming another headline. Let's move forward. December 11th, 1978. John Wayne Gacy arrived at a pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois, to discuss a remodeling contract with the store owner. But his attention quickly shifted to the 15-year-old boy working the cash register, Robert Peast. Gacy began talking loudly about his contracting business, making sure Robert could hear every word. When the pharmacy owner mentioned what he paid his employees, Gacy acted shocked. "What do you mean? I pay my workers 5 times that." Robert's interest was piqued. A better-paying job sounded appealing for a teenager trying to save money. That night, Robert's mother arrived at the pharmacy to pick him up. It was her birthday, and the family had dinner plans. Robert rushed outside, coat in hand, and told her a contractor wanted to discuss a job opportunity. "I'll be right back," he said. She agreed to wait in the car. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Elizabeth Peast went inside to find her son, but the pharmacy was empty. She searched the parking lot, the surrounding streets. Nothing. Robert had vanished. By the end of her birthday, she was filing a missing persons report. Police immediately focused on the contractor Robert had mentioned. When they ran John Wayne Gacy's name through their system, his expunged criminal record still appeared in law enforcement databases. They found his 1968 conviction for sodomy, the witness intimidation charges, and the 2 dropped sexual assault cases from his probation period. Investigators knew they were likely on the right track. 2 days after Robert disappeared, police obtained a search warrant for Gacy's home. What they found didn't prove murder, but it raised every possible red flag. They discovered a 6mm pistol, multiple fake police badges with different names, several driver's licenses belonging to young men, a high school class ring engraved with initials that weren't Gacy's, handcuffs, nylon rope, syringes, hypodermic needles, a collection of recreational drugs, pornographic films, books depicting relationships between older men and teenage boys, and clothing far too small to fit Gacy's large frame. Most critically, they found a pharmacy receipt in the pocket of a blue jacket, a jacket that didn't belong to Gacy. Investigation revealed the receipt belonged to a 17-year-old female employee at the pharmacy who had borrowed Robert Peast's jacket to run outside on a cold day. She'd made a purchase, pocketed the receipt, and returned the jacket to Robert. That jacket was now in John Wayne Gacy's house. Robert Peast had been wearing it the night he disappeared. Police launched 24-hour surveillance on Gacy. Officers watched his every movement, followed his car wherever he went, documented everyone he spoke with. And Gacy noticed immediately. His response was characteristically bold. He tried to befriend the surveillance officers. He'd walk outside, strike up conversations, invite them in for drinks. They always declined. Frustrated, he began leading them on wild goose chases through Chicago at all hours of the night, swerving through traffic, trying to lose them. When that didn't work, he filed a $750,000 lawsuit demanding police end the surveillance, claiming they were targeting him for his political affiliations. But the pressure was destroying him. Officers noted his rapid physical and mental deterioration. He stopped showering, stopped shaving, wore the same dirty clothes for days. He was drinking heavily at all hours, morning, afternoon, night. The confident, charming businessman was unraveling before their eyes. On December 20th, Gacy drove to his lawyer's office in a state of obvious distress. He was disheveled, reeking of alcohol, and immediately asked for a drink despite it being morning. His lawyer, sensing something was deeply wrong, obliged. As Gacy drank, he picked up a newspaper from the desk. Robert Peast's face stared back at him from the front page beneath the word, "Missing." Gacy slammed the paper down and pointed at the photograph. "This boy is dead," he said. "He's in a river." Then John Wayne Gacy confessed everything. He described himself as the judge, jury, and executioner of countless teenage boys. He detailed the murders, the rapes, the torture. He explained something he called the rope trick. How he'd wake up in the morning to find dead, strangled boys on his floor, with no memory of how they got there. He admitted that most of his victims were buried in a mass grave beneath his house, and that the last 5 had been dumped in the Des Plaines River because he'd run out of space. Midway through his confession, Gacy passed out cold, too drunk to continue. His lawyer sat there for hours, waiting. When Gacy finally woke the next morning, he had no memory of anything he'd said. The lawyer had to tell him, "You confessed to murdering over 30 people." Gacy went pale. He shook his head and muttered, "I can't think about this right now." Then he walked out. But he knew the end was coming. Over the next 24 hours, surveillance officers watched Gacy embark on what appeared to be a farewell tour. He visited his closest friend, Ronald Rode, and embraced him in an uncharacteristically long hug before breaking down in tears. "I've been a bad boy," he sobbed. "I killed 30 people, give or take a few." He met with former employees David Cram and Michael Rossi, confessed to them as well, then visited his father's grave, where officers observed him becoming increasingly erratic, talking loudly, growing more emotional, clearly spiraling. At a gas station, Gacy handed a bag of marijuana to the young female cashier, in full view of surveillance officers. "The end is coming," he told her. "These guys are going to kill me." That drug transaction gave police the excuse they needed. They arrested Gacy on the spot and transported him to the station. When officers told him they were about to search his crawl space and expected to find Robert Piest's body, Gacy's response chilled them. "You're not going to find Robert's body under there, but you will find another boy." On December 22, 1978, evidence technician Daniel Gentry descended into the crawl space beneath John Wayne Gacy's home. Within minutes of digging in the farthest corner, he uncovered a decomposed human arm with bone protruding through the flesh. It was small, the arm of someone young. Gentry shouted up to his colleagues, "I think this place is full of kids." A photographer entered to help dig. Within minutes, he struck bone in the opposite corner. Then they found a skull. Then another skull directly beneath it. Bodies weren't just buried in the crawl space. They were stacked on top of each other, bones intertwined, decomposed beyond recognition. In the early hours of December 22nd, John Wayne Gacy sat in an interrogation room and gave police a full confession. 33 murders over 6 years, victims as young as 14, buried beneath his home or dumped in the Des Plaines River. When police asked if there were any more bodies they hadn't found, Gacy smiled. That's for you to find out. If you've made it this far into the darkness with me, drop "still here" in the comments. I want to see who's riding this case out to the end. And let me know where you're watching from. Now let's finish what we started. The excavation of 8213 West Somerdale Avenue took 3 months. Investigators had to dismantle the entire house to reach the crawl space beneath, ripping up floorboards, gutting walls, sifting through soil inch by inch. Every step they took, they were standing on someone's grave. There was nowhere else to stand. The scene was unlike anything these veteran officers had witnessed. Bodies were stacked on top of each other, bones intertwined from years of decomposition. Lime had been spread throughout to accelerate the process. Separating one victim's remains from another became an agonizing puzzle. A femur here, a skull there, teeth scattered in the dirt that might help identify someone's missing son. Physical evidence told stories Gacy had omitted from his confession. Several victims were found with cloth still stuffed in their mouths. Some had been dismembered, limbs severed, bodies decapitated. Objects had been inserted into others. The forensic details painted a picture of cruelty far beyond what Gacy had admitted. By March 1979, the house was demolished. The lot remains empty to this day. 4 more bodies were recovered from the Des Plaines River, including Robert Piest, whose throat was packed with wadded paper, likely stuffed there to keep him silent, while Gacy took a phone call during the murder. In preparation for trial, Gacy underwent over 300 hours of psychological evaluation. He tried desperately to appear insane, claiming he suffered from multiple personality disorder with 4 distinct alters. The clown, who was cheerful and entertaining. The contractor, who was hard-working and professional. The politician, who was serious and intelligent. And Bad Jack, a violent, homophobic persona who despised gay men and sex workers. Gacy insisted Bad Jack had committed all the murders, while his other personalities remained unaware. Psychiatrists didn't buy it. His symptoms seemed rehearsed, convenient, nothing like genuine dissociative identity disorder. However, most agreed he exhibited signs of paranoid schizophrenia and diagnosed him accordingly. His defense team initially attempted an insanity plea. arguing Gacy couldn't be held responsible for actions driven by mental illness. When that strategy faltered, they pivoted to something almost incomprehensible. They claimed the deaths were accidents caused by consensual erotic asphyxiation gone wrong. 33 times, with the bodies buried in secret, in a crawl space filled with lime. The trial began in February 1980 and lasted 6 weeks. Survivors took the stand, including one who vomited while recounting his ordeal in detail. Throughout their testimony, Gacy was observed laughing, smirking, and smiling, visibly enjoying hearing the trauma he had inflicted. The prosecution called him the worst of all murderers, stating he had caused more devastation than many natural disasters. The defense countered that he was a man driven by compulsions he couldn't control, who needed treatment, not punishment. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all 33 counts of murder. When asked to consider the death penalty, they needed even less time. John Wayne Gacy was sentenced to die, but justice moved slowly. Gacy sat on death row for 14 years, filing appeal after appeal. During that time, he gave multiple media interviews, including one where he stated he didn't believe in hitting children. A comment so absurd from a man who murdered 33 of them that it bordered on self-parody. He collaborated with an author on a biography titled Buried Dreams, providing details that actually helped identify 2 previously unknown victims. He even got into a physical altercation with fellow serial killer Henry Lee Lucas over who was the more dominant figure on the prison ward. Lucas stabbed Gacy in the arm with a makeshift knife. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy's appeals were finally exhausted. The day before his execution, he was permitted a picnic on prison grounds to say goodbye to whatever family would still see him. That night, he ate his final meal: a bucket of KFC chicken, a dozen fried shrimp, a pound of strawberries, and a Diet Coke. His last words to his lawyer were calculated for sympathy. "Taking my life won't compensate for the loss of others. The state is murdering me." His actual last words, spoken moments before execution, were more fitting: "Kiss my ass." The lethal injection didn't go smoothly. The first drug crystallized in the IV line and couldn't enter his bloodstream, something that had never happened before. Technicians had to disconnect everything, replace the equipment, and start over. The execution took 18 minutes instead of the expected few. John Wayne Gacy was pronounced dead just before 1 a.m. His brain was removed and preserved for scientific study. The rest of his body was cremated. John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 young men and boys. He buried 26 of them in a crawl space beneath his home, while living his life directly above, throwing parties for politicians, running a successful business, entertaining sick children dressed as a clown. But the true horror of this case isn't just what Gacy did. It's how many times he could have been stopped, the charges that were dropped, the criminal record that was expunged, the survivors who went to police and were dismissed, the neighbors who heard screams in the night and never made a single call. A community so convinced of his goodness that they couldn't see the monster standing in front of them, shaking their hands, making their children laugh. 5 of his victims remain unidentified to this day. 5 families who never learned what happened to their sons. 5 young men whose names we still don't know. For Timothy, for John, for Randall and Samuel. For the 33 we've identified, and the ones we may never know. May their stories remind us that evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it wears a painted smile. And sometimes, the only thing more dangerous than a killer is a community that refuses to believe one exists. This case took me weeks to research and compile. If it moved you, if it disturbed you, if it made you think, then do me one favor. Share this video. These 33 victims deserve to have their stories heard by as many people as possible. Now, I want to hear from you. Which case should I cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there, and remember, you never really know who's living next door.